Sweet. I love farming. We're going to do a question about farming. So we've got Farmer Ray. That's just such a cool name, Farmer Ray. So Farmer Ray is growing crops and he's using fertilizer. I'm sure he's using very good organic fertilizer or something. So don't get mad at him for he's not using like evil stuff. He's not going to damage the water supply or anything. He's just a normal old farmer, good old Farmer Ray, and he's going to use some fertilizer to apply to grow some corn. So if he looks at his records from previous years, he finds that the crop yield depends on the amount of fertilizer he uses. Now, this is something that would be actually very applicable in real life because you could do that. You could measure how much fertilizer you use each year, how much corn you ended up getting at the end of the year, and over several years, you would hopefully see some type of pattern of how the amount of crops were dependent on that. Now, of course, it depends on other things as well, which is why you would want to use several years so that you could take out the outliers and things that didn't quite fit in, the years that it was really cold or hot or, whatever else it might be. But that's beside the point. Right here, we're just looking at the idea of he's trying to figure out how much fertilizer to use. So we have the equation. And it says how much fertilizer will cause Farmer Ray to get no crops. Well, in order to do that, let's just really quickly redefine y and x. Y is the tons of corn, and x is the amount of fertilizer. And how do we know that x is the amount of fertilizer? That's right, because x is the independent variable. It says y depends on the amount of fertilizer. And since we know that y depends on x, that means that x has to be the amount of fertilizer. So let's go ahead and try to solve letter A. How much fertilizer will cause him to get no crops? Okay, well, if there's no crops, that means that y has to be 0. So let's go ahead and put that in. 0 equals negative x squared plus 4x plus 12. All right, so that's putting 0 in for that. Now, hopefully you recognize that if you put 0 in for y, when y equals 0, which is what we're doing, y equals 0, that means that we're actually solving for the x-intercept. Now, for the x-intercept, of course, we want to use x equals negative b plus or minus square root b squared minus 4ac all over 2a. All right, so there we go. We know that a is negative 1, b is 4, and c is 12. Now, if you know other ways of solving this, go ahead. You don't have to use the quadratic formula, but that's all that my class knows right now, so that's what we're going to use. We're going to go negative 4 plus or minus square root b squared minus 4a, which is negative 1c, all over 2a. There we go. We're ready to roll. If you want to use the discriminant first, that's fine. I personally already know that there's going to be 2 x-intercepts, so I'm not going to use my time on that. But yes, you could. You could use the discriminant. By the fact that it says it'll cause them to get no crops, we can kind of assume that there'll at least be one. So we're not going to waste time doing the quadratic formula. But some people, like I say, like to do that first because it just simplifies it anyway. So the 4 squared is 16. 4 times 1 is 4 times 12 is 48. Negative times the negative would be positive 48. All over 2 times negative 1 is negative 2. So x equals negative 4 plus or minus the square root of 64 over negative 2. So x equals negative 4. Please don't forget to do the square root. I've seen so many people over the last 2 days just go straight from here and go plus or minus 64. Holy smokes, children, there's the square root there. Please take the square root. All right, so now we can get our 2 answers. Negative 4 plus 8 would be 4 divided by negative 2 would be negative 2. And then negative 4 minus 8 would be negative 12. Divided by negative 2 is 6. So we get 2 different answers for x. Remember that y is 0, so we found the x-intercept. When the crops are 0, x is negative 2. Now, this one right here, if you think about it, x, remember, is the amount of fertilizer. You can't do a negative amount of fertilizer. I guess maybe a negative amount of fertilizer would be digging the nutrients out of the ground and sucking them away from your plants, but of course that would end up with no crops. So we're just going to kind of ignore this one because it doesn't make sense with our current situation. Now this one right here, means that we need 6 units. We don't know exactly how much fertilizer that is, but we have to assume that he knows what the units are when he was using the formula. So 6 units of fertilizer. So apparently that would be too many chemicals, or it would just overload it or something. So for some reason he wouldn't get any crops. All right, let's go on to letter B. If Farmer Ray doesn't use fertilizer, what will his crop yield be? Well, no fertilizer would be x equals 0, and so that means we're going to go y equals negative 0 squared plus 4 times 0 plus 12. Now if you're saying, but that's the y-intercept, you are exactly correct. So I hope you were thinking that. And even if you didn't say it with your mouth, I hope your brain was going, y-intercept, I'm making x 0. Okay, if it wasn't, then train your mind to when you see x equals 0, go, y-intercept, okay? So here we go. Y-intercept, 0 plus 0 plus 12, so y is going to equal 12. Don't believe me? Go ahead, type that in your calculator. You're going to get y equals 12. And so that means 12 tons. Okay? So if Farmer Ray doesn't use fertilizer, his crop yield is 12 tons of corn. Now that's a lot of corn, but letter C now asks us to find the vertex of the function. Now the vertex you could get in a couple of different ways. If you want, you can do x vertex equals negative b over 2a, which means that we would go x vertex equals negative, b was 4 over 2 times negative 1, which would be negative 4 over negative 2, which is 2. You could have just as easily done the center of the two x-intercepts. Even though the negative 2 doesn't mean anything, it's still a valid x-intercept as far as the function goes. It doesn't make sense in real life. So we would go add the two x-intercepts together, divide by 2. 6 plus negative 2 is, of course, 4, and 4 divided by 2 is 2. So I get the x value of the vertex either way, being 2. Now, getting the x value of 2 isn't the end of the vertex. So I've got to take that 2 and put it back into the equation. So now I'm going to go y of the vertex is equal to negative 2 squared plus 4 times 2 plus 12. Now here, it's exponents before multiplication. Remember, a negative in front is always multiplication. This is why I put it in parentheses, because the 2 is in parentheses, the negative is out in front. And this makes sure that I square it first and then make it negative. So 2 squared is 4, so that'll be negative 4 plus 8 plus 12. Negative 4 plus 8 is positive 4 plus 12 is 16. So my vertex is 2, 16. Now, of course, in letter D, it asks me, what does the vertex mean in this situation? Well, vertex, of course, remember, is either the maximum or minimum. This is bigger than your y-intercept. Therefore, it has to be the maximum. It can't be the minimum if it's bigger than other things. Secondly, remember, transformations, this negative in front of the x squared means that the graph's going to be flipped upside down. And the flipped upside down graph means that the top is going to be, if it's something like this, the top is your vertex. And so essentially that's what we found is the vertex. Now what does this say? Well, x is 2, so x is the amount of fertilizer. So for 2 units of fertilizer, we get a maximum yield of, all right, before we give it 7 after C, okay, that should be right. Maximum yield of 16 tons of crops. Cool. All right, there we go. That's number 3. Hope that's helpful. Ciao.